Have you ever felt humiliated in front of everyone, ignored by the ones you love most? I know what that's like. I'm the mother of an incredible woman, but on a night that was supposed to be a celebration, her fiancé smashed the cake in my face and made fun of me, and no one did anything about it. But at 60-something years old, I wasn't willing to be invisible anymore. Stay with me until the end of this story because you're going to learn a big lesson about dignity, respect, and overcoming challenges that could change your life. And at the end, I'll tell you how you can win a gift that will help you renew your perspective. Oh, and tell me which city you're watching from, because there's a giveaway happening at the end of the month. And if you're not subscribed yet, click subscribe because stories like this are just the beginning. Let's get started. I had always dreamed of this day, watching my daughter, Rachel, all grown up, finally reaching her moment of happiness. The wedding, the day she would marry Jason, the man she chose, and the man I was supposed to accept. The excitement in the air was almost palpable. Everyone was running around, preparing for the big event, and my heart was full of joy as I saw Rachel glowing in her white dress. I didn't need to say much. Her happiness was evident in her eyes. It was the culmination of everything she had worked for, everything we had dreamed about for so long. But deep down, there was something more I wasn't ready to face. I tried to hide it, bury it beneath the smiles and the congratulations. But as I stood there, watching my daughter take charge of everything, something in my chest tightened. It was the silent whisper of a mother's love, a love that had carried me through decades of sacrifices. And now, watching her step into her new life, I couldn't help but wonder, would she still need me? Would I still have a place in her heart?
The sun had already started to dip behind the horizon, casting its golden glow over the garden. The wedding venue was nothing short of breathtaking, an old manor with towering white columns draped in delicate vines of ivy. The air smelled of fresh flowers, and the soft sound of a distant piano played, adding a touch of elegance to the atmosphere. I watched my daughter, Rachel, as she stood by the window, overseeing the final touches. There was a certain grace in her movements, the way she gave instructions to the staff, always with a calm smile. My heart swelled with pride. She was so beautiful, so poised. A woman now, but still, in my eyes, the little girl I had once held in my arms. Guests were arriving, dressed to the nines, and I, standing a little apart from the crowd, took in every detail. I could hear the murmurs of excitement as people admired the setting, but nothing could quite compare to the glow in Rachel's eyes. In her, I saw all the dreams I had for her finally come to life. This was her moment, her dream realized, and I was just so thankful to witness it. I looked at myself in the mirror standing in the corner of the room. My dress, simple and unadorned, did little to highlight me. My hair was pulled back neatly, but I hadn't bothered with anything extravagant. I didn't need to. Today was not my day. It was Rachel's. I had always been the one who stayed in the background, content to watch others shine. And today, just like every other important moment in Rachel's life, I was happy to be in the shadows, quietly proud. The soft fabric of my dress brushed against my skin as I moved, and I could feel its weight. Nothing like the luxurious gowns some of the other women were wearing, but it suited me. Simple, humble, just like me. I noticed the way people glanced at me from time to time, as if trying to place me, but I didn't mind. My role was clear. I wasn't the star of this show. I was the mother, the one who quietly supported, the one who gave everything without expecting much in return. And as I stood there, watching Rachel embrace her guests with such poise, I knew this was exactly where I was meant to be. Jason stood there, a smile plastered on his face, yet I could see through it. I always could. There was a certain arrogance in the way he carried himself, a kind of superiority that rubbed me the wrong way. It wasn't that he was a bad man, not exactly, but there was something about him, something that made me uneasy. He was tall, handsome in a way that drew attention, but it was his attitude that made him less appealing. The way he spoke, the way he moved, it was all too calculated, as if he were always trying to prove something. I'd watched him for years, and each time I saw the same thing. Jason was all about appearances, all about power. But in those moments, when he thought no one was watching, his true nature would show. A man more focused on his own image than the people around him. As Rachel's fiancé, he had a special place in the family now, but that didn't mean I liked him. There was too much distance between us, and even though I smiled and kept quiet, I knew in my heart that something wasn't right. And then it happened. Jason, with his false smile, stepped closer to me. It was all so sudden, and before I could even register what was going on, I felt the coldness of the cake hit my face. The rich, creamy icing, the delicate layers of sponge, they all collided against my skin. The laughter that followed was loud, echoing around the room. Jason stood there, grinning like it was all some big joke, as if throwing a cake in my face was the most natural thing in the world. The room was filled with laughter. His friends, the guests, everyone thought it was funny. And there I was, standing in the middle of the chaos, cake dripping from my face, feeling small. I could hear the distant hum of the music, the clinking of glasses, but all I could focus on was the humiliation. The sharp sting of embarrassment cut through me, deeper than any physical pain ever could. But what hurt the most was the silence that followed. Not the silence of the room, but the silence of my daughter. I looked at Rachel, hoping for some sign, some indication that she would step in, that she would defend me. But there was nothing. She just stood there, eyes wide, like she was too afraid to act. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just humiliated by Jason, I was humiliated by my own daughter, too. I stood there, covered in cake, my heart heavy with an overwhelming sense of betrayal. I turned my gaze toward Rachel, hoping, no, praying, that she would look at me, that she would see the pain in my eyes and come to my rescue. But nothing, not a word, not a glance, not even a flinch. She simply stood there like a spectator in a play that didn't concern her. It was as if the mother who had given her everything, sacrificed so much, had become invisible in that moment. The crowd's laughter continued to echo around me, but the loudest noise in my mind was the crushing silence from Rachel. How could she just let this happen? How could she stand there, doing nothing, while I was humiliated in front of everyone? I didn't understand it. I had raised her, nurtured her, always taught her to stand up for what was right, and yet in the most important moment, she turned her back on me. Was this the daughter I had given everything for? Was I so insignificant to her now that my pain didn't even matter? The hurt was palpable, but more than the humiliation, more than the embarrassment of being laughed at, it was the feeling of being erased from her life that stung the most. I couldn't help but wonder, as I stood there in the chaos of the wedding, where had I gone wrong?
How had I gone from being the woman who held her hand, guided her through life, to the one who now seemed invisible to her? Years of sacrifice, of giving up my own dreams to see her shine, and yet in that moment, I was nothing more than an afterthought. The humiliation I felt wasn't just about the cake on my face or the laughter echoing around me. No, it was the rejection, the quiet, cold dismissal of all the love and care I had poured into her life. I had given so much of myself, and now she couldn't even look at me. My heart ached at the thought of it. Could this be the way things were now? Was this how my daughter, the little girl I had held so dearly, saw me? I stood there numb, trying to hold back the tears, trying to remain composed. But how could I? How could I remain silent when everything inside me was screaming? How could I continue to sacrifice for someone who, in the end, wouldn't even stand up for me? As the music played and the guests danced, I retreated. I couldn't bring myself to join in the celebration. It all felt so distant, so foreign to me now. Everyone seemed to forget about me, moving on with their lives, laughing, chatting, and completely oblivious to the woman sitting quietly in the corner. I could hear the clinking of glasses, the soft murmur of voices, but it all felt muffled, as though I were underwater, trying to make sense of a world that had moved on without me. The cake stains on my dress, the lingering smell of laughter in the air were reminders of my place in this moment, alone, forgotten. I wanted to disappear, to leave without anyone noticing, but I stayed, rooted in that corner, as if my silence would somehow make everything right again. If I could just hold on, if I could just let the night pass, maybe I would feel whole again. But I knew deep down that this feeling of being an outsider would stay with me long after the last guest had left. It hit me then, like a cold slap to the face. Rachel didn't just let Jason's actions slide, she ignored them completely. I thought I was imagining things, trying to justify her behavior, but the truth was there, staring me in the face. My daughter, my precious Rachel, had allowed all this disrespect, not just from Jason, but from everyone around her. It wasn't just a matter of her turning a blind eye to my suffering. It was as if my pain meant nothing to her anymore. She was too wrapped up in the excitement of her new life, too focused on the wedding to even care about the woman who had raised her. I couldn't help but wonder, as I sat there alone, what had happened to the girl I had nurtured, the one who would have never tolerated this? What had changed in her? And more importantly, what had happened to the mother who once held all the power in her life? Had I lost it all for the sake of being a good mother? Or had I simply been blind to the truth for far too long? As I sit there, alone in the midst of that lavish celebration, a bitter taste fills my mouth. I realize that Jason's attitude was no accident. It had been a slow accumulation of disrespect, and now it was all laid bare before me. But what hurt the most wasn't the cake on my face or the cruel laughter. It was the silence of my daughter. How could she stand there, looking away, pretending not to notice the pain on my face? Did she forget how much I had sacrificed for her? How many nights I stayed awake, worrying about her future? I am not a fool. I know when I am being disrespected. But what strikes me now, in this moment of clarity, is that I've allowed myself to become invisible. A part of me always thought that being patient, being the silent pillar, would earn me respect. But that's not how the world works, is it? Dignity isn't something that can be expected from others. It has to be something you demand for yourself. My heart aches, not for the humiliation I've suffered,
but for the realization that I've spent years letting others define my worth. Is this really what I've allowed my life to become? Am I willing to continue down this path, accepting scraps of respect from those who don't even see me? The thought terrifies me, but it also lights a spark. It's time to stop being passive, to stop hiding behind the smile, pretending that everything is okay when it's not. I can't let this be my story any longer. As the evening wears on, I watch the guests laugh, dance, and sip their drinks, while I sit in silence, nursing my wounds. Jason's comments keep replaying in my mind. The way he used to make little jabs at me, his condescending remarks about my job, about my social status. Each time, Rachel would smile and pretend it was just a joke. How many times did I swallow my pride for the sake of peace? How many times did I allow his cruelty to slide under the radar, just to avoid confrontation? It's strange, isn't it? How someone who should be a part of your family can make you feel like you don't belong at all. And yet, I allowed it. I convinced myself that love and patience were enough to overcome his arrogance. I told myself that it didn't matter, that he would eventually change, that Rachel would see through his facade. But I see now that I was the one who needed to change. I was the one who needed to stop tolerating the intolerable. I can't even begin to count the number of times Jason belittled me, his little jokes about my modest lifestyle, his constant assumptions that I didn't understand the world he lived in. He thought his wealth and status gave him the right to talk down to me, to treat me like I was invisible. But the worst part, Rachel never once stood up for me. Not once. And it's in this realization that the depth of the betrayal hits me. She let him. She allowed him to treat me like that. And she never once questioned it.
I remember the first time Jason openly mocked me. It was a few months ago, at a family gathering. We were all sitting at the table, laughing, when Jason made one of his usual remarks about how simple my life was. He said something along the lines of, "I guess you wouldn't understand. You're just, one of those small town types." The way he said it, with that smug smile on his face, made my skin crawl. At the time, Rachel just laughed along with him. It was as if she didn't even hear what he said, or worse, didn't care. But that night, something inside me snapped. I looked at my daughter, my only child, and I realized that she wasn't going to defend me. Not then, not ever. She was too comfortable in the life she had built with Jason, too wrapped up in the idea of keeping up appearances. And that realization hurt more than any cruel word Jason could ever say. I thought about all the years I had spent raising Rachel, teaching her right from wrong, guiding her through every tough decision, only to have her stand by and watch as Jason trampled over me. For the first time, I questioned my own worth. Was I not deserving of respect? Was my place in this family only to be a silent witness, a background character, in a story where everyone else had a voice except me? For years, I swallowed my pride, biting my tongue every time Jason made one of his sarcastic remarks or belittled me in front of others. I thought that if I stayed quiet, it would somehow keep the peace. I believed that if I didn't react, the tension would fade away. But over time, I began to realize how dangerous that silence was. It was as if each word, each cruel gesture, each moment of disrespect was being buried deep inside me, piling up until I could hardly breathe. And yet, when I looked at Rachel, I saw nothing, no sign of recognition that I was suffering, no apology, no remorse. She was always too busy, too caught up in her own life to see the cracks forming around me. I had become invisible to her, a shadow in her life, someone whose feelings didn't matter. But this silence, this passivity, had done more damage than anything else.
It wasn't peace I was creating by keeping quiet, it was a slow death of my dignity. I had allowed myself to be overlooked, dismissed, and disrespected because I thought it was easier than confronting the truth. But the truth was this: staying silent had only empowered Jason and Rachel to continue treating me like I was less than human.
The music played, the laughter echoed through the room, and yet all I could hear was the hollow emptiness in my chest. I watched as Jason and Rachel danced together, smiling and laughing as if everything was perfect. But I wasn't part of that perfect picture. I wasn't part of their joy. No, I was on the sidelines, the invisible woman in the room. How had it come to this? How had I gone from being the woman who raised Rachel, who gave her everything, to being someone who was disregarded like this? Jason was no better, always acting as if I were some old, irrelevant figure who had no place in their lives. Every glance, every gesture was a reminder that I was a mere spectator in my own daughter's life. It wasn't even that I was angry. No, it was worse than that. It was apathy, a complete and utter indifference to my presence. And I realized in that moment that the real hurt wasn't in the words spoken or the jokes at my expense. It was in the silence, the exclusion, the deliberate ignoring of me. I wasn't even worth the effort of being disrespected. I was just forgotten. Something shifted inside of me. It wasn't anger that surged, not anymore. It was clarity, a deep, resounding understanding that I could no longer live in the shadows of my own concessions. All my life, I had swallowed my pride, hidden my feelings, and ignored the slights against me in the name of peace and family. But peace at what cost? It wasn't about forgiveness or revenge. It was about finding myself again. I could no longer excuse Rachel's blind loyalty to Jason, or the way I had been treated as if I were invisible. The more I reflected, the more I understood that the choices I had made, the sacrifices, had all been out of love. But that love had been one-sided. My heart was full of love, yes, but now, for the first time, I wondered if I had ever been truly seen, truly appreciated. The transformation wasn't a grand, loud moment. It was quiet. It was like a seed being planted in the soil of my heart, and over time it began to grow, strong and unyielding. I no longer needed validation from Rachel or Jason. I didn't need them to see me as worthy. I had finally seen myself. As I sat in the quiet solitude of my thoughts, I began to recall all the sacrifices I had made throughout my life for Rachel. Every step she took forward, every success she celebrated, had come at a cost to me. I had worked tirelessly, bent over backward to provide for her, to ensure she had everything she needed. But in all that giving, what had I received in return? I had always thought that love meant giving everything, that love was selfless. I thought that if I loved enough, everything would be okay. But now, sitting in the shadows of my own life, I wondered if I had given too much. Had I lost myself in the process? Was my love just a means to an end for them? A silent sacrifice that no one saw, no one appreciated? I couldn't help but question if it had been worth it. Was it worth the years of silence, the quiet suffering, the never-ending sacrifices? I had poured so much into Rachel's life, but in the end, I was left with a hollow feeling. It wasn't anger that consumed me, it was something far more painful. The realization that I had spent so much time loving someone who never fully understood the depth of my love. In that moment of deepest pain,
I remained silent. The weight of humiliation pressed down on me. But in the midst of that crushing feeling, there was a growing sense of something else, something I couldn't quite name. It was a quiet understanding that I had reached my limit. For the first time, I realized that I didn't need to fight back or raise my voice. I didn't need to beg for their attention or approval. I stood at the edge of it all, watching the world go on without me. But for the first time, I wasn't desperate to be part of it. I wasn't desperate to fit in, to play the role of the dutiful mother or the quiet observer. I felt like I was reclaiming my space in the world without needing anyone's permission. As the noise of the party continued around me, I felt strangely distant from it all. The laughter, the music, the chatter, all of it seemed far away. It was as if I was watching from behind a glass, separated from the reality I had once been so desperately a part of. And in that moment, I realized that the pain of being ignored was far more powerful than the pain of being seen.
I didn't respond to the taunts. I didn't say a word. And that silence, oh, it spoke louder than any words ever could. It was a declaration of my own strength, a quiet rebellion against the world that had always expected me to shrink, to bend, to yield. I wasn't just holding back my words, I was holding back my power. In the quiet of that moment, I realized something that would change me forever. The world may never understand my silence, but I didn't need them to. My silence wasn't defeat. It was my way of saying, I see you, without needing to shout. My silence wasn't weakness. It was strength in its purest form, and understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is not respond. For years, I had let others speak for me, define me, shape my worth. But now, my silence was my voice. It wasn't a voice that begged for attention or validation. It was a voice that stood in its own right, that didn't need to explain itself. In the quiet aftermath of all the tension, I made a decision that was mine and mine alone. I would no longer allow myself to be defined by the expectations of others. I would no longer shrink to fit into a mold that didn't belong to me. No more swallowing my dignity, no more playing the role of the invisible woman. The pain of being ignored, of being treated as though my presence didn't matter, had been building for years, but it had reached its peak. And now? Now it was time to break free from the chains of silence and fear. My heart raced with something I hadn't felt in a long time: clarity. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. No one ever said the path to freedom would be paved in roses. But for the first time in a long while, I was ready. Ready to stand tall, to speak up, to take back the pieces of me I had given away for far too long. I wasn't just reclaiming my voice, I was reclaiming my life. The room fell silent as I stepped forward, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the surge of emotion that ran through me. The truth had been buried for too long, hidden beneath layers of pretense and politeness. It was time to bring it to light. I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on me, expectant, curious, waiting for something dramatic to unfold. Jason looked at me, a smug smile still on his face, as though he had won. But I could see the cracks beginning to show. The truth always has a way of doing that. Taking a deep breath, I spoke, my voice clear and firm. You all think this celebration is a grand gesture, a fairy tale come true, but you don't know the real story behind it. The truth is, I've been the one paying for everything: the wedding, the venue, the dress, the flowers. I've been the one carrying the weight of this day, all in the name of love and family. The room was still, the only sound the soft hum of the air conditioning. I could feel the tension in the air as the truth sank in. Jason's face turned pale, his arrogant grin vanishing as the realization hit him. And then there was Rachel. She looked at me, her eyes wide with disbelief, as though she couldn't comprehend what I was saying. But it was true. I had been the one who made all the sacrifices. And now, in this moment, I was taking back my power. A cold silence filled the room after my words. It was as though time itself had frozen. I could hear the subtle gasps of shock, the quiet whispers that followed my revelation. The guests exchanged confused glances, unable to process what they had just heard. Jason's face flushed with embarrassment, his earlier confidence shattered. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. It was as though he had lost the ability to speak, and all the arrogance he had carried for so long vanished in an instant. Rachel, on the other hand, stood frozen. Her eyes locked on me. Her lips trembled, but no words escaped. She looked like she had just been slapped, as if the foundation of everything she believed had been ripped away from under her feet. For a long moment, no one moved. The room remained eerily still, and it was only then that I realized the power of truth. It wasn't just about exposing the lies. It was about claiming the space that had always been mine. Jason finally found his voice, but it came out weak and desperate. "This is absurd," he muttered, trying to regain control of the situation, but the damage was already done. The truth had been spoken, and there was no going back.
Rachel took a deep breath, as though bracing herself for something she had been avoiding. She moved toward me, her steps slow but determined, and I saw the conflict in her eyes. She was torn between the man she had married and the woman who had given her life. "Mom," she began, her voice soft but laced with a hint of defensiveness. "You don't understand. Jason didn't mean it that way." I looked at her, the pain in my chest growing with each word she spoke. How could she stand by him after everything? How could she defend someone who had disrespected not only me, but everything we had built together? "You're right," I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "I don't understand. I don't understand how you can allow someone to treat your mother this way." Her face hardened, and for a moment it felt like the years of love between us were evaporating into thin air. She was no longer the daughter who would run to me with open arms. She was now a woman caught in the crossfire of loyalty and the truth. She opened her mouth to speak again, but I raised a hand to stop her. "Rachel, you've made your choice. Now I need to make mine," I said, my words final. There was no turning back now. My heart ached, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. The room was quiet, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace in my decision. As the tension in the room settled, I felt something shift within me. It wasn't anger or frustration. No, it was something much more powerful. It was freedom. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to explain myself, to justify my decisions, or to seek approval. I had spent so much time living in the shadow of others, accommodating their needs and desires, that I had forgotten the woman I once was. I stood up, feeling the weight of my own dignity, and I realized that I no longer needed to be tied to a life of silence and submission. My worth was not defined by how others saw me, especially not by someone like Jason, or even by Rachel's passive acceptance of his actions. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief. The burden of carrying the weight of their expectations was finally being lifted from my shoulders. I was free, and that realization was liberating beyond measure. I looked at Rachel one last time, the love I once felt for her still burning bright. but now tinged with the knowledge that I had done all I could for her. The ball was in her court now. I turned to leave, knowing that the road ahead would be different, but that it was one I was finally ready to walk on my own terms.
In the days that followed, messages of apologies began to flood my phone. Rachel with her usual words of regret, Jason with his empty attempts to make amends. But I wasn't fooled. Not anymore. They said they were sorry, that they didn't understand the depth of what had happened, but I couldn't help but feel a deep emptiness as I read their messages. Apologies without change were just empty words, hollow promises, and I had no room in my life for either. What good was an apology if the behavior never shifted? What good was being sorry if nothing was done to earn back the trust that had been shattered in that moment? I didn't respond immediately, nor did I have the urge to. It wasn't about punishing them or holding grudges. No, this was about something deeper. This was about reclaiming the power I had lost over the years, and part of that meant not allowing myself to be manipulated by words anymore. I had to look inward and find peace within myself before I could even consider offering forgiveness. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't something I owed them. It was something I had to offer when I was ready, not because they asked for it, but because I chose to release the grip of the past that had held me for so long, and I wasn't there yet. I had no need for closure from them. What I needed was peace, and that was something they couldn't give me. As the days passed, I began to withdraw from the world even more. I stepped away from social media, stopped answering calls, and let the silence become my refuge. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace in being alone. It wasn't that I was bitter or angry. No, it was just that I had finally learned to value my own company. I didn't need the noise of the outside world or the apologies of those who had hurt me. The quiet was my sanctuary now. It was where I could hear my own thoughts without interruption, without someone trying to twist the narrative to fit their own version of events. I no longer sought validation from others, nor did I crave the approval that had once dictated so many of my decisions. The silence taught me that I didn't need to be loud or present to be seen. I was enough, just as I was. And in that silence, I rediscovered my strength. It wasn't in grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. No, my strength was in the quiet confidence that came with knowing my worth, knowing that I no longer had to tolerate disrespect, knowing that I could walk away from anything that threatened my peace. There was a certain power in silence, a power I had neglected for too long, but now I embraced it fully. In the days that followed, I sat in quiet contemplation, reflecting on everything that had transpired. How had I allowed myself to become invisible for so long? How had I let others dictate my life, my choices, my worth? I thought about my journey, the years of sacrifice, and how each decision had been made with the intention of protecting those I loved. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself. Somewhere in between all the giving and pleasing, I forgot to give to myself. I realized that my life hadn't been about living. It had been about surviving. I had been surviving for everyone else, trying to hold things together, to be the glue that kept everything intact. But in doing so, I had broken pieces of myself along the way. Now, as I reflected on it all, I felt a sense of gratitude. Grateful for the pain because it had shown me the truth. Grateful for the silence because it had allowed me to hear my own voice again. Grateful for the lessons learned, even if they came too late. And as I sat there, looking out the window at the changing sky, I knew that I was finally ready to embrace the future. No longer trapped by the past,
I was free to be the woman I had always been inside, strong, worthy, and unafraid to take up space in the world. With a new perspective, I decided to focus on my well-being and my future. No longer would I let others define my life for me. The weight of others' expectations had been crushing, and now I was free to create my own path. I started looking for new passions, things that brought me joy and fulfillment. It wasn't easy, but it was liberating. I'd spent so many years putting others first that I had forgotten what made me feel alive. It was time to rediscover those things, those little moments that made life worth living. I found peace in the quiet, in the solitude that once felt so lonely. I started reading books that inspired me, taking long walks in the fresh air, and slowly the weight lifted. It wasn't instant, but it was real. I was beginning again, and this time it was for me. I knew the road ahead would have its challenges, but I was no longer afraid. I was walking into the unknown with courage and conviction. The pain of the past had shaped me, but it didn't define me anymore. I was ready for whatever came next, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful.
In the end, I found my inner peace. I learned that I no longer had to submit to disrespect, that my dignity should be preserved at all costs. I no longer needed to seek validation from others or endure the bitterness that came with being constantly overlooked. I had learned to say no without guilt, to honor my own needs, to put myself first for once. It wasn't easy, but the quiet satisfaction that came with it was worth every effort. I looked to the future with hope, with a sense of renewal. The lessons of the past would always be with me, but now they served as reminders of how far I had come. I had rediscovered my worth, and no one could take that from me. Now I walked through the world differently. I no longer felt invisible. I had regained my power, my strength, and my sense of self. And for the first time in many years, I could say, without hesitation, that I was truly at peace. What would you do if you were placed in a situation where disrespect was too much to bear? How would you react if you were ignored, even by those who should protect you? The protagonist of this story showed us that no matter how painful it may be, we should never lose our dignity. Her courage in facing humiliation and exposing the truth makes us reflect on how much self-respect is truly worth. Now, I want to know from you, how far would you let people cross the line? Have you ever lived through or known someone who had to take action to reverse a disrespectful situation? Leave your comments down below. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, don't miss any more inspiring stories. Subscribe now and hit the bell to stay updated on all the content. If you enjoyed this story, share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Let's spread more courage and respect around. What would you do? Comment, share, and let's keep this conversation going.